I'm Jenna from Yarn Designers Boutique, and today we're going to present how to dye yarn and silk scarves in a crock pot the no mess way. I'll show you a few things here. This is yarn that we've dyed the same way and knitted into a beautiful little cowl. The colors are kind of painted, which is one of the effects that you can get. And this is one of our patterns. This one. The next one here is another cowl. This was my very first project, dyeing yarn in a crock pot. I did it with a neighbor who had alpacas, who figured out how to do this, and I joined her for an afternoon with a bunch of other ladies, and we had a lot of fun, and this is what I made from the yarn. After that, I studied because I really wanted to learn to do this and see the different ways, and I basically came back to our original technique. That's what I'm going to show you today. All right, so to dye your own yarn, you need to come up with a method, a type of yarn, and the dyes. And what I've narrowed this down to is sort of a foolproof way to do it. Basically, you pick a yarn that comes in a hank so that you can control where the dye goes, and it also is in a light or undyed color. And then we're using the Jacquard Acid dyes, which the only thing that's acid about them is that you mix them with vinegar. And so they're pretty safe. If you were doing this all day long, you might want a mask when you're working with the powder, but basically they're really safe and create very vibrant colors. We sell all 40 colors of the Jacquard Acid dyes online, in your kit, and in our store in Big Bear City, California. Okay, so let's see. So we have chosen, we're going to do 2 pots of yarn, and we've chosen a sock weight here. This is from Kramer. This is from their Naturals collection. It's called Sterling. It has a little shimmer to it. Not sure if you can see that, but it's a beautiful sock yarn. And in our pot, we can put about 3 skeins. Each one of these is over 400 yards. They're tiny, so we can put that much in our pot. In this pot, we're going to do Surrey Alpaca. This is a blend of Surrey Alpaca and Merino wool, also from Kramer. It's called Mary. This one was Sterling, yes. Okay, so these are the yarns we've chosen, and we've chosen them because they're in this category. They're a protein fiber. We can use silk, wool, protein fibers, and nylon with the Jacquard Acid dyes. You don't want to use anything else. The dye won't stick to it. Okay, also, as a fun thing, since we'll have a little room in our pot with these, the way we've picked these skeins, we're going to dye a silk scarf with our yarn, which means you could make some accessories from this or whatever and have a matching silk scarf. It will take the dye a little differently, which makes it interesting. Now this one is all kind of wrinkled because it was originally washed in synthropol, which is a nice concentrated surfactant, which takes anything that's remaining on the silk fiber, because this is, you know, from silkworms, and it might not be totally even. So it just helps the dye soak into it. And we're going to do an experiment today because this pot, we're going to use the one that's already been treated. In this pot, we're going to use an 8 by 72 inch scarf, same fabric. It's silk habitai, and we're not going to do anything to it. We're going to take it straight, and then we'll be able to see just how well these soak in. Okay. So let's see. We have a number of things on the table here for our processing. We have our vinegar ready. This cup is going to use our vinegar. By the way, these dyes are powders. Okay, so we're just going to be sprinkling the powder in. We don't have to do any mixing. That's why I call this the no mess crock pot dyeing, because we're going straight into the pot and we don't have to mix anything. The only thing we're going to mix is we're going to measure out our vinegar for our pot. Okay, we have these two canisters here because we're going to wet our yarn. Okay, so we're just about ready to start. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our hanks. And by the way, you do have to have a hank. If you have a yarn that's in a skein, you will have to make it into a hank. And this is what a hank looks like. Some of you may not have seen these if you go to chain stores. But this is a hank, and it's nice and long for different reasons. One of the reasons is when we dye it, because these yarns were made by Kramer primarily for dyeing. We have different ways we can put it in the crock pot, so this gives us a nice width. It also, if we were hand painting, which is another way to use the acid dyes, we could divvy up our colors across this nice long hank. Okay, but today we're going to use the long hank in two different ways in our crock pots. The first thing we do when we open up our hank is we look at how many ties, you might want to get closer for this, are actually on the hank. There's one there, there's one here, and that's it. Okay, so this is not real. No, there's a third one. Okay, so what I like to do, what happens when it's in the pot, it's very wet and can get messy, and you can just be real unhappy if you haven't tied it off a couple more times. So when you see the little ties here, okay, first of all, when you put one on, you put it very loose. You can do any kind of a knot just so it stays on there. And you can pick any yarn to do this. Usually kind of interesting to see what happens to this yarn with the dye. You inspect the ties. Now, Kramer knows we're going to dye this yarn, so it's quite loose. Okay, that is very good. Okay, so we would just go around here and put a couple extra ties on this skein. Okay, so I'm going to stop and let you tie your skeins, and then I'll be back with what we do next. Hello, so now we're back, and you should have your hanks looking something like this with some ties on them. I forgot to mention why you want the ties loose. This is really important because you might buy from another manufacturer that doesn't have the tie loose. What that does is allow the dye to get inside the hank, because you could have white spots here, and we don't want white spots unless you're, well, you don't. When you're crock pot dyeing, you really don't want whites, anything white. You want it to all be saturated, and that's the way the dyes work. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn our crock pots onto low. So you can do that. And then we're going to put a cup of vinegar into each pot. And that can be warming up while we start soaking our yarns. And they're going to resist it at first. And I would say you would want to let them soak for 10 or 15 minutes. And then when this gets down a little bit more, I'll add the scarf. And let's put our vinegar in this one. Get our yarn going here. So you want to just keep pushing it down. This can be just a tap water. It doesn't have to be warm or anything. Our scarf, this scarf's going to go in here. So you can go ahead and do that, and then when we come back, we'll talk about picking your dye colors and how we're going to load the pots to make sure you have a real nice set of colors for your yarn. Okay, so now we're back. Our yarn is all soaked, our scarf is soaked, and we're going to talk about the yarn dye colors that you're going to pick. Now, most people like to dye yarn because they like to see the different changes, the contrast in the colors together. And this particular type of dye is very brilliant. So it is really fun to pick colors that aren't like each other. If you picked 2 shades of lavender or purple, you would get something like this, which is really pretty and more muted. or you can be more contrasty, where I've started with black and red and got a few grayish colors in the middle, and we can get way brighter than this, which is why I've picked some very bright colors today. So in this pot, I am going to be using Yellow Sun and Brilliant Blue. Now what's going to happen is some green is going to come out of this when the colors touch each other. I don't know how much. I don't really care. I'm just thinking I only need 2 colors. It makes it easy to show you how to put the color on, and the likelihood of a color in the middle will be interesting. So that's why we picked these 2 colors for this pot. We also can control how the dye sits on the yarn. So I'm going to give you this one as an example on the top of this pot. So in order to, this was a short skein. It's tighter. I actually rewound it from Kramer because I wanted it tighter. So I used my red on this side and my black on that side. Another way to do this is to have the longer skein and just twist it and fold it over. And then you're going to get your dark or one color on the ends and the center, the other color. That's the way we're designing this pot. Okay. So we're going to take our lid off, and we're going to wring out our scarf. I like to put the scarf in last on the top, so it's coming off first. Get our water out of here. We're just going to set it in our cup. Now we can start squeezing out. I'm going to do this one skein at a time so we can control the dye. It's pretty wet. It's soaked up really nice. The reason we put it in the water first, I did plenty of pots without it, but I think the color just has a better chance to soak into the yarn a little bit better. And you don't have to take all the water out, but basically just so I can handle it and show you what I'm doing here. Okay, so now we have our hank. Let's push this out of the way a little bit. So we have our hank, and we're going to just twist it once and lay it in our pot. And we are, that's an extra one. We are scrunching it around the edges, pushing it up against the side. Okay, now we have it in here. We folded it over once. Okay, so now we can take our dies, and we're basically going to line this up so half of our die is on one side and half on the other. Now the only way you can ruin this is to mix it. Okay, so we are not doing any mixing. That's why we're using a crock pot, by the way. You can dye yarn on a stovetop and use the same dyes, but then you'll get one color pretty much, and you would never mix your colors. You would just get one. You wanted yarn that was a certain color blue, and so you cook it on the stovetop and you agitate a little bit to get the dyes to go through. We're doing just the opposite here. And we're going to just shake it over. Are we getting a good picture there, Chris? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, we're probably going to need, just want to get enough on there to get it going. A little bit more. I'm going to need another bottle. This was, all right. I usually use a different spoon for each color because we're using it more than once here. Now we got our bright yellow. Just moving it on the outside. Okay, our yellow going. Okay, now we're ready for our next hank. You can wear plastic gloves to do this, but usually I don't worry about that too much. Okay, so I'm opening up my skein again, and I'm folding it once in half. Then I'm laying it over the top on the edges, trying to get it right on top of that last skein, kind of right on top. And then I just keep, I'm putting my blue on the left here. And since I'm right here, I'm running out of blue, because I've done a lot of pots with that. I can reach back here. Oh, by the way, I have chosen number 623 Brilliant Blue and number 601 Yellow Sun. There. Okay, now we'll go back to the yellow on the other side. Now, one of these bottles costs $4.69, and you can use them 3 or 4 times before you need to get a new color. Okay, now we're on to our last skein. Pink, I guess, not really a skein.
So with the darker colors versus the lighter colors, like how do you know how much dye to put on?
You put 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon, kind of shaking it around. I try to shake it so it's not too piled up, but the beauty of this type of dyeing with the Jacquard acid dyes is after you cook it, it will, when it's done cooking, the water turns clear. Okay, so you don't, if you use too much dye, it's just wasted, that's all. I don't like to waste anything, so. All right, so I folded that in half and I put it on top, and I'm seeing that this is filling the pot up nicely.
But how do you know if you're using too much versus not enough, like when you're putting the dye on?
Well, you can see how much I'm putting on. It's real easy to get too much in there, and then you just kind of wasted it, because it does stay in the pot and doesn't go all the way in.
Is that yarn going to have white spots?
No. No, the cooking is going to, the way we've loaded it in here and packed it in here, it's going to be just fine. I might need some more Yellow Sun too. It's fun to just pick new colors every time you dye, so you build up a bunch of colors that you have to choose from. I think every time I dye, I start maybe 1 or 2 more bottles. Let's see, Yellow Sun. Yellow Sun, here we go. Okay, yeah, see, I can see I don't have quite enough on here. But you can see how much I'm using. It's not very much. Okay, now we're ready for our scarf.
Okay,
can you see?
Take a break.
Okay, we're going to take a break. Okay, now we're back, and we have our scarf. I'm not sure what you can see here, but oops, well, I dropped it on there anyway. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so I'm just going to, there's really no rhyme or reason on the scarf thing. It's going to pick up whatever it wants. Now, I put the scarf on the top because I really usually don't want any white at all. And since it'll be at the top, we'll be able to kind of pat it down and make sure it gets white into all of it. If it was buried underneath, I wouldn't have any idea what was happening. I'm just putting a similar amount. I do like yellow and blue again. I don't have any yarn left that has yellow and blue in it, so this will be a nice one. Now, it's a good idea to keep track of what yarn you've used by brand and what it was made out of, such as alpaca or wool, as well as the dyes you used, as well as whether you did half and half or whatever. And then when you get all done, your yarn's done, take a picture of the yarn, then you'll know if you want to dye that again, if it turned out nice. And then also if you finish a swatch of it or make something up in it, put a picture of it also. I have done 30, 40 batches, and I don't have as many pictures as I would like, but they all turned out good, so I can make them again. Okay, so now we are ready to put hot water in this. Now we're going to stop right now so we can show you how to load the pot. Okay, so now we have gotten a full pitcher of hot water from the tap, and we're going to start slowly pouring this in the center and letting it fill up. And hopefully this is enough. We want to go all the way to the top. Best we can. Yeah, that's perfect. All right, and now we take an old wood spoon that's gone through many, or dedicate a new one, and you just start pushing it down before we put the lid on.
So when you push it down, do you start with the lighter colors so you don't sort of model it up?
That's a good idea. And I am turning this up to high because we are going to cook this for an hour on high, and then we're going to turn it down to low. By the way, this should be a crock pot that you dedicate to this. Okay, because you can never eat in this again. Don't want to eat in this crock pot. So I took my oldest crock pots, and both of these are actually purchased in a thrift store, and then I got brand new one for me for eating. They last a long time if you take care of them. So this is good. This is perfect. All right, and now we just put our lid on this one, and then we'll be back in a few minutes and show you how to do the other one. Okay, now we're back, and a couple things I want to start out with. We had a question about how much dye to put on. So I have an example here that this was in a whole pot. This was just one of the skeins. The other skeins came out different, but this was kind of a short skein, and so I had a lot of the darker green, and in this particular skein I felt that it overpowered my lighter green. Okay, it's very pretty. There's a lot of yarns you could buy that look like this, and they would think it was perfect. But that's an idea, that if you go stronger with a dark color, it can overpower a lighter color that you want to complement with. Especially black. If you use black, and there's a black dye, use very, very little, because it will overpower anything it's with. Okay, so we are going to talk about using 3 colors in this pot, as well as how we lay the yarn and the scarf out. It's going to be different. I need the cup to put the scarf in. So we have chosen number 636 gold ochre, which is very bright, 631 teal, and 613 purple. Perfect. We are going to lay them out just like the show here. We're going to put this on the left, this in the center, and this on the right. And we're going to keep doing that in our layering. Okay, so now we can get our scarf all scrunched up here. Most of the water out. So we can fold it. Okay, and this is going to be our sock yarn. And we've picked 3 colors so we can be nice and bright. People like bright sock yarn. I'm glad we put those extra ties in there because this can get real weird. And tangled. We don't want tangled. All right, this one we're going to lay in the pot differently. And, woo, can you smell that vinegar? Okay, untangle it. Now, this one we are going to drop in here and scrunch it. We're going to get the whole thing in there, scrunched together. We haven't folded it over. It's just scrunching up with itself. And going in there like that. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to put our yellow here, our teal here and here, and our purple on this side. This is going to be gorgeous. So this is gold ochre. Okay, here's our teal. Powders don't always look like the color they're going to be until they cook. And we're going across this side. We'll probably get some green out of this too. Greenish blue because these colors are next to each other. And our purple. Okay. All right, now we'll start our next skein in here. We need some more vinegar, if you wouldn't mind. Our vinegar dried up in the bottom here because we have been doing this for a while. Thank you. So I'm just going to get in there again. It's not a perfect formula by any means, but it needs vinegar to really set the dye nicely. Okay, so I'm going to scrunch this in here again, just like I did the last one. Now we're doing 3 skeins. They should go nicely with each other if you're going to use all 3 for a project. You could do a beautiful shawl with this. And then what you do when you're knitting it is you work from one skein for a few inches and then you go to another skein, because it's just going to be very abstract how the color goes on there. And if you're combining skeins, you even though they're cooked in the same pot, you definitely want to mix them up.
What do you mean? Like you
Well, you have all your skein, you know, your 3 skeins ready for your project. You know you're going to use most of the 3 skeins. They're in a ball, ready to knit. You start on one. Say you're making a shawl, and you go 2 or 3 inches into your shawl, and then you switch to another ball. And kind of do them in the same order, so you know which ball you went to. And you just rotate, and then the colors will move through there. No matter how they were dyed, they'll just move through there more interesting and not splotchy. I've learned the hard way buying yarn from other dyers and didn't think I needed to do that, but most of them recommend that you do that. Anyway, they put it somewhere in their labels or whatever. Okay, and our last skein. It doesn't look like much yet, but it will. I like doing this with people. It's always fun to see what everybody comes up with. More like work when I just dye by myself. So we're having fun doing this video and dyeing. It's like you're right there with us. See, this is nice filling the pot. It's usually about 3 hanks. Or nice dyeing, and then you're not wasting anything. I mean, it doesn't really matter. You can do 1, but you'll be wasting. Wasting dye. Wasting water, wasting dye. This is our teal on this. Yeah, I can see that teal. Teal's really pretty. Now, if you studied color, you may want to put certain colors next to each other because you already know they're going to make a certain 3rd color. We're kind of guessing here. And I think it's a little more creative when you guess, but I don't try to match my yarn to anything, but everything here will match each other. That's why it's nice to put a scarf in there. Okay. Now we'll do our scarf. We're going to lay our scarf in here different this time. This is a shorter scarf. This is a 5-foot scarf, I think. So we're going to scrunch this scarf kind of the way we scrunched the yarn, instead of folding it in half and putting it on. It's going to create its own thing no matter what. This is good, nice volume here. Okay. All right, that's our last yellow. That teal is gorgeous. Soaking in there already. And our last purple. And right at the bottom of the thing on the purple, so we're going to use all of this. Just go. The whole thing. You can really see how those colors are nice. Okay. Okay. Now we're going to add our hot water. And we can just turn this to high. Start putting the water in. Drop down the center. Good amount. Okay. Use our trusty spoon. Now, we're doing this in the evening, so we are going to be able to cook this on high for an hour, and then we're just going to leave it overnight. When I dye with customers, I usually do it early in the morning, like 9 o'clock, and we're done in about an hour, getting it all going. And then I have them come back at 5 o'clock, see the results, and take their yarn home. And I tell them how to dry it, which we'll get to a little bit later. So we're going to cook this for 6 to 8 hours. You can test it to see that the water is clear, of course, as you're going along. And you can open the pot and check it, see what's going on. Let's stop now because I'd like to get a view of the other pot so we can see how it's going. All right, we're back to our first pot, and it's been cooking almost 30 minutes. So it's going to look a little different. I can play with it right here and get some of this powdery color. You know, it's still not really boiling yet. So, you know, some of this powder hasn't broken down. But we're going to get yellow and green with the blue, and it's going to stay fairly segregated. Because remember, we have those layers there holding that dye in place. It's going to cook, but it's not going to be stirred. Okay, there was a question about, can we overcook it? You can't really overcook it. You could cook it 12 hours. You just want to be able to dip and see if it's clear, basically. Fine, you know, a little cup or something just to see if it's clear. If it's clear, you don't need to cook it anymore. If it still has color and you want to quit, you can quit. That's just fine. Okay, so we're going to be back when it's done and see what we have. Okay, so now we're back for the unveiling. Once your yarn is cooked, basically you turn your pot off to cool it down. That will take a little bit. And so now I have cooled these down somewhat, so now we're going to open them up and take a look. So this one is looking pretty nice with lots of different colors. There's the bright and the blue. And we can go down here and we can see that that water is almost completely clear. That's really good. Let's do the same thing for this one. This is going to be darker, but it's going to be very interesting, rich. And this one is really clear. So we absorbed, even though we had quite a bit of dye, we absorbed all that dye. That's pretty good. So let's see what we've got here. We can pick it up and see we've got lots of different colors. I do this gently because it seems so weird at first what we've done here. But we've got lots of color variegation there. Okay. And And this one is going to be darker, but when it dries, it's going to look totally different. Okay, so we've got some deep purple in there. We've got our teal. See how clear that water is? It's just really nice. And then we've got some gold. Oh boy, yeah. Look at that. This is gorgeous. And when it's, oh my gosh, it's so exciting. It's like giving birth to something that was totally white. And now it's so rich, and it's going to look even better when it's dried and rinsed. Okay, so the next step would be to take your pot and get most of the water out to get the weight off it, and you can dump it in your toilet. That's usually what I do, because there are some of the residual dyes I'd rather have down the sewer than the sink. And we've cooled it down so we can handle it. This one lifts out, which is kind of neat. Boy, it's heavy. So basically we've got to get the weight out of there, and so we'll come back once we've done that. Okay, now we're back, and we have just gotten the water out of these, and I think it's pretty neat to see how those colors lined up in our scarf. That is a dynamite scarf. Okay, I am looking at these and putting them in our jug here so that these can go straight to the sink to be rinsed in cool water. Okay, so as you pull these out, you're just delicately, this is one of my best dyes here, I think. Certainly appeals to me. So we've gotten some green from the blue and yellow coming together. Okay, so I'm just going to drop these into our thing here. Now, these are really nicely matched. Certainly could do a single project out of this. Very, very nice. This is worsted weight yarn and will be for sale online, and we'll repeat if it sells. And this is our third one. Just lovely, lovely colors. Okay, now we're on to this pot. Now these are just amazing. Our scarf, since it had some of the dye that wasn't completely dissolved, it put some sprinkly things here. Wow, and when this light is dry, it's going to look totally different too. But this is the one we scrunched, so the color is, you know, lays a little differently than the other one. Oh my gosh, okay. All right, so look at this. We've got our purples, the bluish greens, and our golds. Oh my gosh. And this is sock yarn, so this makes a pair of socks. Each one of these makes a wonderful pair of socks. And here's the next one. This could also be used, the 3 skeins together. They give you 1,200 yards. Could be used for a nice project. I'm very happy. We've got some little light spots here, but it's been my experience that people don't really care that much. It just lets them know for sure it was hand dyed. Oh, this is our bottom one. Yeah. Oh, wow. Now it's interesting. It is very different compared to the others. So it's going to, these will probably sell in the store and online. Individually, people will want to do them for a pair of socks, so we'll try to show the difference in the skeins when we photograph them. Okay, so now we are ready to rinse these out in our regular sink with cool water and then squeeze them out. When the water's clear, then you're done. And then they should be hung up to dry across a clothesline or a shower rod, somewhere where you can continue to wring out the bottom until they don't drip anymore, and then they won't drip. I love putting mine outside in the fresh air. I don't put it in the sunlight. I don't really want my yarn in the sunlight. I just dyed it. And when it's completely dry, which may take 24 hours, then we'll come back and show you what we have. I want to remind you that on this batch here, we started with the Kramer Mary yarn, which is Surrey alpaca and merino wool, and this natural color has people either love it or they go, I wonder if that'll dye. Well, obviously it dyes very well. And then this one, our sock yarn, is merino wool and silk superwash. This is superwash merino, which means you don't have to be, it won't shrink in the washing machine, but I like to wash my socks in on the gentle cycle, and then I dry them just sitting on top of the dryer. 20% silk and nylon, and it has this little silver glitter, so these are going to be really nice. Okay, so we will be back when our yarn is done to show you what we have. Hello, and now we're back. Our yarns are dried. They have come out beautifully. I would just like to mention that, to note that the ties, which we use just acrylic yarn, obviously didn't take any of the color, and they're not really pretty to look at, so I've taken my ties off this one, wound it into a beautiful hank, and so I'd recommend that you take those extra ties off. You don't need them. And then this is our purple and teal one. Okay, so we have named our yarns. This is Southern Sole, S-O-L-E, for our sock yarn. This is what we started with. This is our beautiful skein. Now notice it puffed up, filled up with the color. It'll still knit the same way, but it's blossomed with the colors, what it's done. And our scarf, my gosh, these little specks are a result of some of the powder not dissolving, which I think is a wonderful effect, and just another reason not to worry about those powders. We've got our teal, we've got our purple, and we've got our gold and yellow. The same thing is reverberated through here. We've got 3 totally different color sections, which is what we wanted. These skeins are enough alike they can be used together or separate. And then on our worsted weight, which amazingly starts in this off-white, stronger color and comes out delightful. Even some of these lighter areas are not this color. So, this one we're calling irises. Now we have pressed this scarf, whereas this one is not pressed yet. But you can see how really gorgeous, and you can see that some of the speckles made a pattern on this too, which is just delightful. I don't think I could have gotten a better result with what we chose here. Vibrant colors, fun colors, nothing's muddy, and you can envision whatever you'd like to make with this. The next time you see me, I'm going to have some knitted swatches from each colorway. Okay, so now we are here for the creative part. We're going to talk about different choices, go over why things turned out the same way that they did. So right now, I'd like to zoom in on my swatch that I've done from the Southern Sole yarn that I have right here. It turned out with a base of teal, and the purples and golds pop out. So I've made up a swatch that's approximately the size of a sock in the round, so you can see how the colors paint onto it. So if you, no matter what you do with this yarn, it's going to have kind of a painted look to it. That's because we use 3 colors and because of the way we scrunched it into the pot. So that is, if you want a very painted yarn, use 3 or more colors and scrunch it around the sides of the pot. That's the same thing we did with our scarf, where we started with one end and got our golds, and then we got into our purples, and then got into our teals on this yarn. So we did that style with that. So this is what our skeins look like, made up. And I think, you know, they're a great colorway. So let's move this out of the way, and let's talk about our second one. Now this one, we did half and half, and when we did the scarf, we folded it in half, so it's a mirror image. It's a mirror image. Folded in half. We've got our blues on the front and back here, our gold yellows here, and more blue on the end. So we accomplished that by folding it in half and putting it around the pot. that's also the same way we put our yarn into the pot. Okay, we twisted it once and we folded it over, and then when we put our dye in, we put yellow on one end, blue on the other. Where it came together, it created some green. So that was our intention on this, to show you a different way to do it. Now what's interesting about this is once you start to knit it up, you have some choices. This is what our yarn looks like when it's made into a nice little skein. It just looks like the color just pops back and forth between the yellow and the blue. What I like to do is, and this is what we've accomplished here, if you look at this much of this scarf, this yarn color is going around this scarf and creating this cascading. We call this loading the color onto the yarn. The way this was accomplished to here was I calculated what needle size I needed and how many stitches I needed in order to make a similar, a scarf that was acceptable and to have the color load around. See, the back is just the opposite. When you open it up like this, you can see the opposite colors coming through. Now, this is quite unusual, and you can duplicate this. All you have to do is dye it the way I did, using it folded in half and two colors. Your third color will either come into it or it'll just be two colors. Now, I've continued to just knit straight so you can see it's not loading and turning, it's just coming straight up. So that's another thing that's kind of neat about this colorway, is whenever you figure out what you want to do, you can control the way the color falls. You'll have to play around with it your first few rows if you're going to do a scarf or anything else, but you can control how the color lays. If you don't do anything at all, it will end up probably looking more like a paint in a larger piece. Say you're going to make a shawl. If you use a lot of stitches, the color is just going to fall in there however it falls. But the smaller amount of stitches, you have a choice on how to make it fall. In our kit, to dye yarn, you will get this pattern, this brioche scarf pattern. So if you use any of the Kramer yarns, which I've pulled out some here so you can see there's a lot of choices, the width of the hank is what controls the fact that you can do this, okay? So I'm going to send you a pattern that says cast on 16 stitches and use size 11 needles if you're working with worsted yarn. If you're working with a different yarn weight, it'll be a different number of stitches and a different needle, but that's what controls it. So with the Mary yarn, you absolutely can duplicate this. You can duplicate the colors, or you can use any colors you want, but you would need two colors basically to make this work. So let's wrap this up now. We do have these yarns for sale. This is called the irises, and we also have the what do we call this? Southern Soul sock yarn available for sale in the hanks. We will continue to make the yarn if people are interested in these colorways. We also have the dyes, and if you go to our kits online, you'll find out the choices for that, because it's pretty obvious what we are using for that. When you look at our kits, you also can pick from any of the yarns. So basically, it gives you a lot of options, and if you have any questions, you can call us. And if you want to look at this further, you can check us out on Ravelry, Etsy, and shop.yarndesignersboutique.com, which is our main resident website. So that wraps it up for today. Thank you very much for following along with us on this video, and I hope you really start dyeing yarn because it's so much fun, and include your scarves. We also have kits where you can just dye your scarf, but it's very simple. You don't have to use a crock pot. You can do it in under an hour. You can have your whole scarf completely done. So check that out also at shop.yarndesignersboutique.com. Thanks so much.